You're listening to Deliberate Living, a podcast that inspires, empowers, and encourages listeners to live life more authentically. My name is Holly Priestley, and I'm a full-time nomad and writer who has been living in my 1997 Ford van since January 1st of 2019. I travel the United States with my dog, learning how to live with more authenticity. I explore different ways people choose to ditch the prescribed life we've all been sold and live on their terms, finding freedom and happiness however they choose. Hello, and welcome to another episode of the Deliberate Living Podcast. I am your host, Holly Priestley, and I am really freaking amped about this episode because this is my 52nd episode, and that means that I have been creating this podcast for a year. I mean, I've been creating it for slightly over a year, but it's been being published for a year, and I'm really proud of myself, to be honest. I'm going to toot my own horn. We should all be proud of ourselves more often and not necessarily looking for external validation. And I can't believe that I have kept up with this for a year. On the one hand, I can believe it because I do what I want and I want to do this, and so I do this. And on the other hand, like many of you, I'm sure, I start a lot of creative projects or creative endeavors or new sorts of business opportunities, and you know, through the exploration and experimentation process, sometimes, most of the time, to be honest, a fair chunk of the time, I determine that they are not the right avenues for me. But this podcast has been a right avenue for me. And this is the 52nd episode, and it will be followed with a bunch of fun giveaways. So if you're listening to this in real time, the day that it's published, please come follow me over on Instagram. That's where all of the giveaways are going to be happening. I debated doing them on all the platforms that I release this on, and all the other social media channels as well. But I think just for simplicity's sake, for both myself and my guests who are providing some of the giveaway materials, it would just be easiest to have it all in one location, and that location is Instagram. So my handle over on Instagram is just Holly C. Priestley, HOLLYCPRIESTLEY. But you can also type in hashtag Deliberate Living, and you should find me that way as well. But yeah, if you're not following me on Instagram, come over there and join in on the festivities because this is a celebratory week and I am so fucking excited. Next week we will get back to the usual interviews and you're really going to like the next one for sure. I enjoyed recording it and meeting the woman behind that account. So anyway, that's next week. This week we are talking about podcasting. I got a question a few weeks ago about my process of podcasting, what I've learned over doing it for, the last many months. And so I'm going to take this opportunity to talk about podcasting, what I've learned from podcasting for the last 12 months, every single week, how I create my podcasts, like the mental aspects as well as like the nuts and the bolts, in case you're curious about that. I'm going to talk about the future of the podcast, how I have kept it sponsor-free, ad-free so far, and whether or not I will continue to do that moving forward, and how you can help me make that decision. And I'm going to give out, every piece of advice I can think of as far as podcasting or starting a creative endeavor of your choice, because I've been doing this for a fucking year and that's exciting. So, I'm pretty excited. So why do I even have a podcast in the first place? Might be a good place to start the show. Essentially, I have a podcast because I believe that this information, all of this information about living deliberately and especially living a deliberately alternative lifestyle is vital, that there's not enough conversation about it, that we need to have more conversations about it, more stories, more sharing, more like informational and educational as well as inspirational, aspirational content around it as well, because I think that more people should have access to it. I grew up in the same society as many of you grew up, and I grew up believing that there was a certain set of steps that we all need to take in life, and if we took all of these steps and lined up our lives perfectly, we would be happy. And as with most of the people that I've interviewed, I followed that prescription, and I got to a point where I was like, okay, cool, I have everything I am supposed to have. I have the house and the salaried, benefited, cubicled position. I have the perfect job. I went to the good schools and I got my degrees and all of that. And like, when is this happiness going to happen? When does the happiness show up? I was told that there would be happiness here and there wasn't. And so I have found a lot more happiness pursuing a deliberately alternative life on my terms. So I want to share that with more people. And I do it a lot on my other channels. On Instagram, pretty much everything I post has some kind of tie to lifestyle, lifestyle design, van life, being an entrepreneur, everything that matters to me as a person. And I cross-post all of that to my Facebook page as well. It's not on my personal page, it's on my business page, so go find me there. And I have it on my website and on YouTube and all of those things. But I wasn't getting the reach that I was hoping for, and not necessarily from like an egotistical standpoint. Like, I want more people to have this information because it has changed my life. And so as a result, I create each episode of this podcast in an audio format, as most podcasts are. I create it in a video format, and I put it on YouTube. And then I also create it in a written format for my blog. And it's not a straight transcript because nobody wants to read those. It's a standalone article that has all the information in it as well. Again, because I believe that this information and these stories should be available to everyone, no matter where you are or how you choose to consume it. Some people like listening, some people like watching, some people like reading, and I didn't want there to be any kind of barrier. I didn't want there to be any kind of paywall. I didn't want there to be any kind of restriction in any measure. I want this information and these stories to be out there. So last year, when I got the inspirational hit to start the podcast, I went through all of your normal excuses not to, and a few of my own very unique cocktail of excuses not to, including, the idea that everyone and their mom has a podcast right now. Like, I'm really late to the party. Who the fuck do I think I am? What do I think I have to say that's unique? Like, I'm not unique. I'm not doing anything that only I can do. I'm not doing anything you can't do. Who's going to listen to me? Like, what do I have to say? Who am I? And then the biggest excuse for me to not start it was that whole, like, what if this is just another one of those things that I start and then I stop within a few weeks? And I don't necessarily like being that person who like starts and stops. I like finishing what I start. But how do you finish something that's open-ended? A. And B, why continue making something that you're not enjoying making anyway? Or why continue a business venture that you hate? Or why continue a friendship that doesn't serve you anymore? Why continue to date someone who is toxic? Like, why don't we normalize starting things and then finishing them before they're supposed to be quote unquote finished? Like, why don't we normalize testing things out and experimenting with things? So that was a huge barrier for me, but, yada, yada, yada. Been there, done that, and I figured that I should give the show a try anyway, just to see what happens, just in case. And you know what? Like, I love it. A year later, 52 fucking episodes later, I love it. I really love the process of creating the show every week. Even though, like, some weeks I'm tired or some weeks I'm really incredibly busy and I don't have the time to put in, the 5, 6, 8, 9 hours that the show takes. Each episode takes a different amount of time based on whether it's just me recording for myself or whether I have an interview, how much editing is required after the fact to make the show flow or take out all of the ums that I throw in there. And I don't get all of the ums in, so I'm sure y'all have heard me say a lot. But even after doing this for a year and putting in hours and hours every week into doing it, I still really enjoy the process and I'm not bored with it, and that is insane to me. And part of the reason that I can continue to produce show after show, week after week, is because I very deliberately picked a topic that I know I have a lot of passion around and that I have a lot of things to say. Plus, I know a lot of other folks pursuing their own deliberately alternative lifestyles, and I knew that sharing their stories as well would be just as valuable to my audience as sharing my own stories and experiences. So the decision to make a podcast came first, and then I made sure that I picked a topic that I knew I could be consistently excited with. And then it just came to actually like making the first episode, like scripting out my intro and my outro and test saying it a few times and recording it and re-recording it and re-recording it and re-recording it because I didn't like the way my voice sounded or I stumbled over my words or whatever. And then I had to like find all the music and figure out how to host it and all of that. And so, that was kind of the easy stuff. I could have made it, into an excuse like, oh, I don't know how to host it. I don't know how to make it. I don't know how to use these programs, etc. But I didn't. Once I decided that it was a thing I was going to at least test out, I made sure that I figured out how to do it. So I'm going to talk about that next. I'm going to talk about how I create each piece of the podcast, what it costs roughly, and all of that. So if that's something that you're interested in, please keep listening. If you're not interested in how I create a podcast or how you might also create a podcast, skip ahead a few minutes and reconvene later. So when I started the podcast, I didn't have a lot of money to spend on the show to like hire professional editors or producers or anything. What I did have was, more time and elbow grease. I'm a self-employed person and I'm used to using my own like self-discipline to accomplish what I want to accomplish and teaching myself new skills. And I'm a huge believer in the concept of, 80% now is better than 100% never. So, I tried to get the podcast to, a pretty good standard, but not perfect, because I knew that if I tried to make the podcast perfect, that I would never start it. So when I first got started with the podcast, and even still, I use inexpensive or free programs and platforms and that sort of thing. And it worked then and it still works now. I've changed a few things over the course of the last year, and I might experiment with new things in the next year. But you will just have to tune in to podcast 104 to hear about what changes have been made over the next year, because I don't know what they are yet. But to record and produce the podcast as it is now and as it has been for the last 12 months, I use a program called iMovie. It was already installed on my Mac. I had already paid for the Mac. I didn't buy it specifically for this project. I've had it for years, and I bought it refurbished, probably for, I think maybe like $1,300 like 6 or 7 years ago. And iMovie was already installed on it for free. So that's what I use mainly to create each and every episode. It has a recording feature in the program, so I just record myself like I'm doing right now. And I can edit it pretty simply. Those first few episodes took a lot longer because anytime you're trying something new, it's going to take a little bit longer to figure out how to like cut and splice and add music and have like different tracks. And, I said, a lot. So then using iMovie, I export the file as both an audio only version and then as a video version as well. I use YouTube to host the video versions. It's free. And I use a program or a platform called Buzzsprout to host and syndicate the audio version. It's not free. It's cheap, though. The price varies based on how much podcast you upload in a given time frame. I think every month the lowest cost version is like $12 a month. But then that's for 4 hours of content or something. So some months I do go over that. When I have a month of hour-plus long shows, I pay more than $12 to host all of that content, all that show. But I will link to that in the show notes. I'm pretty sure I have a link that'll get you a discount, or me, or both of us. So I will link to that in the show notes if that's something that you're interested in using. For the written up versions of each podcast, I go ahead and I do that myself, and I host them on my website. So I'm already paying for the website hosting. I'm already paying for, the URL and the WordPress and all of that. And then I write the episodes myself, so I don't necessarily pay for that in anything but my own time and energy. So that's pretty inexpensive again. I think the hosting for my website is around $100 a year or something like that, but it's wrapped into all of my other business expenses. So not totally free there, but pretty inexpensive. And you can get free websites as well. Mine just happens to be paid because that's a priority for me. Back in the beginning, I did pay a professional designer to create the artwork for my podcast. You can see it in the thumbnail on any of the podcasting audio platforms, and then also the YouTube thumbnails that I change out every episode and update with episode number, title, and a photo of whatever the hell that episode's about. So I did pay for that, It was really inexpensive, like less than $20 for 4 different images for me to use. And I might get an updated version, but I kind of like the ones I have. I think they're pretty. But maybe it would be worth it to upgrade again this year. Who knows? I use free music for my intro and my outro. You can find free music online fairly simply. Most of the time, the Creative Commons license that it has usually just requires you to put a link and a reference in your show notes or in your YouTube description or, wherever it is that you're using it to say, like, music is from this person and it's this link or whatever. So if you look at my show notes ever, you can see that I have that and I reference who I got my music from. When I do interview versions of the podcast, if I'm not doing them face-to-face, as most of them are not, especially this year with COVID, I use Zoom to record my video interviews. And because it's just a one-on-one call and it's not like a 1-on-2 or 3 or whatever, I only have 2 people on the call. I can use the free version of Zoom and I can have these calls last as long as I need them to. So, pretty inexpensive. I would say monthly costs for the podcast as a whole, we've got the $12 a month on Buzzsprout. $100 a year is less than $10 a month for the website hosting service, and then the designer was less than $20. So it's less than like $30 or $40 a month for me, like total, if I was only using the website for the podcast, etc. So pretty inexpensive. Pretty simple, a lot of figuring it out as I go. I'm sure there are better ways out there, and I know other podcasters use totally different platforms and programs. So this is not the only way to do it. If you're considering making a podcast, go and experiment, explore a little bit, see what works for you, and continue tweaking that system. This is a system that works for me, so I'm going to keep doing it and tweaking it. So what exactly have I learned from a year of podcasting and creating my own show? Namely, that it's a lot of fun and it's a lot of work. Having a system and a process in place really helps me get everything done without forgetting pieces of it. Having a flow for how my interviews go or what I want to talk about each episode definitely helps. Even if I'm having an episode where it's just me talking at the camera and recording myself, I still like to have kind of an idea of what I want to talk about and maybe what order it makes the most sense to talk about it in. That helps me make sure that I'm producing a high quality show for you guys and limit my editing later. Having a flow for the interview helps me use my time with my guests very wisely and make sure that I'm touching on the elements of their stories that I think are important, which are namely like your background, what you were doing before you started living your deliberately alternative lifestyle. So for me, like what I was doing before I moved into the van, what moving into the van was like, whether I was afraid of it or not, what happened at the beginning, how it's going now. And then I also want to talk about the logistics of like, how do you pay for everything and what does it all cost? Because I feel like, no matter what it is, the lifestyle that you're looking for, if you want to start a business or start a family or whatever the fuck you want to do, it's kind of nice to know like the thought process behind it, the soul changes that happen, the lessons that you learned, but also like how it's happening. So I try to incorporate all of that in my interviews as well. And then having a system and a process for post-production is also incredibly helpful for me personally. Getting an episode like edited and uploaded, exported, and written up and all of that in one fell swoop is usually better for me than like breaking it up into chunks and like doing a bit and coming back to it later and doing a bit and coming back to it later. When I work that way, more broken up, I will forget things and stuff will fall through the cracks. And that's not good for me or for you guys. So I try to just knock out an entire podcast, or at least the editing part. I might record previously, especially if I'm doing an interview, and then, bang out the post-production and editing and all of that in one fell swoop. That's what works for me. So what does the future of deliberate living look like? To be honest, I kind of thought I was going to stop the podcast after I reached this 1 year mark, this 52 episodes mark. Just a few months ago, one of my friends asked me what my plans were with the podcast and if I was going to keep doing it or not. And I wasn't sure, to be honest with you. I didn't know if it was providing the value that I was looking for. I didn't know if it was serving you guys. I didn't know if it was serving me. And I waffled on the decision pretty hard. And I was kind of leaning towards wrapping it up after a year and calling it a great experiment, because it has been. But right after I kind of waffled on it and was leaning towards stopping it, the universe started showing up in new ways and showing me that there was another option here. And basically, what it told me was that the show kind of took a long time to get started, took a long time to like push start the engine and get the audience and get the reach and start having the impact that I was really going for. But now, 12 months in, it's rolling, and it's basically rolling all by itself. And, I still put in hours and hours every week to produce each episode, but the show itself is having the impact. I'm starting to hear from people that it's like actually helping them in a lot of ways. They're learning new things. They're, getting started on their own transitions into deliberately alternative lifestyles. And that's what I want to do. And so the whole point for me is reaching more people and getting this information out there, and I'm doing that. And so I'm not going to quit doing the podcast. I'm going to keep doing the podcast. I have shows recorded that I need to edit and put all that work into for weeks from now. And I'm really, really excited to share them with you, because I feel like the quality of the shows is improving. And so the future of the show is that it's going to continue. I don't know for how long, of course. I can't make any guarantees, but for now, it's going to keep going. And it's going to keep going as long as it makes sense for me, and as long as it makes sense for you guys, and as long as I'm having the desired impact that I want to have. Another thing that crossed my mind a few months ago when I was debating whether I should keep doing this or not is whether I should look at acquiring some sponsors for some of the episodes or for the show as a whole. I did a bunch of research, and I really wanted to work with brands that align with my purpose and my goal. I wanted to earn a little money from the show so that I can invest more of my time and energy into it and keep improving the quality of the episodes and the quality of the interviews and the quality of the education. I researched brands, I sent inquiries, I agonized over it, and I looked up sponsorship opportunities left, right, and I figured out how to do all of that. And then I decided not to. I don't want to cheapen the deliberate living experience. I don't want y'all to have to skip over ads at the beginning, at the end, or like somewhere in the middle. I listen to podcasts quite a bit, and I always skip the ads. I never listen to the ads. I don't have any idea what product they're promoting, and I don't care. I'm just here to listen to the host and their guest that week talk about whatever the show is about. And I imagine that's what all y'all are here for too. You don't want to have to hear me say like, oh, and it's time for a break, and then I read off, some canned, although aligned, because of course I wouldn't work with brands that didn't align with my audience and the purpose of the show. But even still, I don't like hearing ads on podcasts, and I imagine you guys don't either, and that's some of the feedback that I've gotten as well. So no ads, no sponsors for deliberate living. What that means, in addition, is that I'm looking to be sponsored by you guys, my audience, my listeners, my watchers, my readers. I want to keep my platform ad-free, and in order to do so and to keep producing the show, I need your support. And there's a number of ways support can be provided. One of the ways to support the show is, of course, financially. I have a Venmo and a PayPal set up and linked at the bottom of every single show note section. They're also linked in my Instagram profile. And if all of you guys sent in like a single $1 in support of each episode you enjoy, like that will be enough for me to continue with the show. It really doesn't take all that much. And it means that the show will continue to be focused on you and what you need and want to hear, rather than what my brand partnerships require me to produce. But financial support is not the only kind of support that the show really could use and benefit from. Other ways you can support the show include subscribing to the show on whatever channel you use, or on all of them. Feel free to follow me everywhere. on, Spotify or Apple Podcasts or, I don't know all the podcast things, but I'm everywhere. And on YouTube or, even Instagram and Facebook, etc. Come link up with me on LinkedIn even. Like, I'm over there too. Another way you can support the podcast is by going on these social media platforms, Instagram, Facebook, LinkedIn, Twitter, yada, 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 and then saving the posts that I create, whether they're about the podcast or not. Saving the posts seems to be the current algorithmic preference. You can comment on the posts. You can like the above posts. Also, as always, please feel free to share the above posts or any of my episodes with your own feeds, your own audiences, or like specifically with someone who could benefit from that individual episode, or as the show as a whole, of course. But interacting with my work will help other people see the show, see the content that I create around the show and around the topic of deliberate living, and will help us grow and grow and grow and keep growing and continue having the impact that I'm really looking for from producing the show. And another thing you can do to support the show is to send me your questions, like things you want me to answer or people you want me to interview or, other topics you want me to touch on. Or, if I talked about it in a previous episode, but you want me to take a deeper dive, like I can do that too. I want this show to be about you guys. That's why I'm not doing brand sponsorships or anything like that. So you tell me what you want and I'll make it for you. My biggest pieces of advice for anyone else looking to start a podcast in 2021 or whenever is to pick a subject that you are so passionate about that you could talk about it for days and days and days and days on end, and that you could talk about anybody else about it for days and days and days on end. Pick a subject that you really want to research. Pick a subject that you really want to talk to others about and share things about. Pick a subject that you are authentically curious about, excited about, and want to pursue in your own dang life, A lot of people really enjoy listening to those true crime podcasts, and I know that there's a van life horror stories podcast out there by one of my previous guests, Hillary. You should check it out. But, she's really curious about, true crime and horror stories, but she also lives in a van and wants to share those stories, so she's making a podcast about it. That's cool. That's really unique and very niche. So there's no topic that's too narrow or too broad to create a podcast about. You just have to pick something that actually aligns with you and your preferences, that you're not going to peter out after a few episodes. You want to make sure it's something that you love. The next piece of advice is not to let perfectionism prevent you from getting started. Don't let a lack of a microphone prevent you from getting started. I don't even have a microphone. I just use whatever's on my computer. Don't let a lack of expensive recording software prevent you from getting started. Like I said before, I don't have any expensive recording equipment. I'm just using my computer. Again, if you don't have a computer, use a phone. So many of us have smartphones, and if you're listening to this anyway, you probably have a smartphone of some kind, or a computer. You have one or the other, so use that to record. Don't overthink it. Don't stress yourself out about needing to be perfect, you want it to be good. Don't just try and put out something that is bad. But like I said earlier, 80% now is better than 100% never. So just get the fuck started. I started with what I had. I still use just kind of what I had. And was it perfect? Is it perfect? Abso-fucking-lutely not. The important part is to do the best you can with what you have, upgrade as you need to and as you're able to, but don't overthink it. Just start. Give it a shot. Creating this show has given me so much new skills. It's helped me meet new people. It's helped me grow my business. It's helped me make new friends. It's helped me get more aligned with who I am as a person. And I'm super grateful for that. And I'm really grateful for you, each and every one of you, listening, watching, reading, whatever it is. I'm super happy that you're here. And thank you for making it through this whole episode. If you've been with me from the beginning, from my first episode a year ago, thank you very much. And I hope that you continue to find value in these shows. And let me know what you want to see from Deliberate Living moving forward. Thank you very much. Have a great day. We've reached the end of this episode of Deliberate Living. You can find the show notes and everything we referenced over on my website, and be sure to subscribe wherever you listen to podcasts, on YouTube, or sign up for email updates every time something new is published. I'll see you next time on Deliberate Living, and until then, keep your life on the DL too.